The general perception of the Black Swordsman arc seems to be that it shows us Guts at his most ruthless and heartless. I've even seen some go as far as to call him a sociopath for some of his actions. I want to propose a different interpretation to this section of the story, one in which Guts is an empathetic man fighting a battle born from his care for others. First, it's important to understand why Guts set out on his war of revenge in the first place. The obvious reason being anger and hatred, but I want to look deeper. To understand the source of his rage is to understand his mindset in this arc. Of course, Guts' rage is complex and multifaceted. I'm not going to be looking at it in relation to Griffith or Casca specifically. I'll be focusing on a different aspect of it, one just as, if not more, deeply rooted in his heart. In the chapter Cracks in the Blade, when Godo calls out Guts' self-destructive mindset and suggests running away from war and hatred, we see what makes Guts angry. He tells Godo with a twisted face one facet of what fuels his rage, that practically everyone in the Hawk was robbed of their lives, squashed like bugs with no understanding of why. Guts goes on to say, they were all young. They could have done something if they'd lived, but still, in an instant, to me they were irreplaceable. This facet of Guts' rage comes from the lives that were stolen from others, not the way those loss of lives affected him. He puts emphasis on their personal journeys, placing what they were to him as an afterthought. They could have done something if they'd lived, gives them an open-ended future. But still, in an instant, to me, they were irreplaceable. Shows us that he didn't hold their lives with strings attached. Their lives would move on, whether he was a part of it or not, but in that moment, they gave him a place he belonged. This fits in with his campfire by the side of the road mentality. He doesn't tether himself to the Hawk. He's happy enough just knowing their flames are still burning, that they're still out there, living their lives and accomplishing their goals. Guts doesn't mention losing his eye, his arm, or being branded as a sacrifice. The source of his hatred isn't just from what he's lost, but from the collective pain of others. In the chapter Campfire of Dreams, Guts tells Casca about the aspirations of some of the men fighting alongside him in the Hawk. He knew about the dreams of his comrades, seemingly even more intimately than Casca, who looked confused as he described members of the Hawks' goals after the war. Seeing the fire of their dreams extinguished all at once was too much for him. To Guts, the collective pain and disappearance of so many dreams became a focused rage that paved the way for his war. All of this pain was created by a source that only he could fight against as someone living on the interstice. Like Griffith, he felt the pain of all those that had died fighting for a dream, and he shouldered it all, fighting a solitary war to keep those men's dreams alive in the only way he knew how. Because he's the only one that can fight this war against the ones that squashed the Hawk's dreams, Guts adopts a by any means necessary mindset. If he dies, then the dreams of the Hawk disappeared in vain, for no reason. This is the source of his fear, and it's the crux of how he can come off as so heartless in the Black Swordsman arc. But you can bet he feels every bit of pain he sees around him. No matter how much he says he doesn't care about those dragged into his battles, it's made abundantly clear time and time again that that's a facade Guts creates to protect his own sanity. Because of the brand of the sacrifice, anyone near him at night is guaranteed to be injured, and that's if they're lucky. His rough exterior is a symptom of his empathy. He doesn't want to hurt others, but he knows anyone near him will end up worse off than they were before they met him. Because carnage follows him no matter what he does, he has to pretend that the deaths of others don't affect him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to bear continuing in his solitary war. So now that we've gone over the source of Guts' anger, his fear caused by his need to shoulder the unrealized dreams of others, and the reason for keeping others at arm's length, let's get into analyzing the Black Swordsman arc scene by scene. The first scene where Guts' empathy shines through is the second time we see him, right as he enters the territory of Coca Castle to kill the Snake Apostle. A wagon passes him by, filled with sacrifices to the demon, and Guts makes eye contact with one of them, a child that vaguely resembles Casca. After the wagon passes, he looks back, pausing for just a moment, before moving on. Later in the story, Guts admits that he knew the children were sacrifices. The fact that he didn't stop the wagon and save those children could be interpreted as him being heartless, but I don't think that's the case. Saving those kids would delay him in his war, something that he isn't willing to do. If he got sidetracked with every atrocity he saw, given the world of Berserk, he'd never progress in his war. But he also doesn't walk by the wagon without a thought. He looks back, pausing. We aren't privy to his thoughts, but in this moment, I think he's conflicted. He saw Casca and the rest of the Hawk and those kids, lives full of potential, about to be cut short for no reason. But he can't stop by the side of the road he's paved for himself. All he can do is feel their pain and move on, a motif that comes up many times in this arc. Then comes the moment Guts saves Puck and declares war on the castle. When Guts walks in, he's met with two pieces of information. First, he hears someone call a group of men soldiers of Coca Castle. Second, he sees one of them throwing knives at a tied-up Puck. His reason for attacking them is mostly to send a message to the apostle he intends to kill, but the first man he attacks is the one throwing knives at the defenseless elf. I think that's enough to show that Guts intended to help Puck, even if he had an ulterior motive. After Guts leaves, Puck follows him, being his talkative self. Guts doesn't respond, but he doesn't tell him to go away either. Then, Puck tries to sit on Guts' shoulder. Guts lashes out, his childhood trauma coming out in the form of his angry Facade. He spits out that he'll crush Puck. Puck understandably takes offense to this and promptly flies away when the two of them are met by a group of knights. After being captured and tortured, Guts is left in a jail cell, barely able to move. Puck comes to his rescue, not only giving him the keys to the cell, but also healing his wounds. Puck saving Guts after Guts had saved him gives Guts hope that they can become comrades. Almost every time he's grown closer to someone, it's come from them covering each other's backs in battle, and Guts shows that he's beginning to open up after Puck asks him about the brand. Guts says, "You'll find out soon enough." This implies that he's beginning to trust Puck, and that he thinks maybe he'll stick around. Then, Guts spells out his Facade to Puck. He says that anyone who dies because of him is a weakling that deserved to die. As Guts puts his Facade on full display, Puck feels what's behind it and spells it out for us. Rage, sadness, fear, and something deeper than that. Guts' rage is born of his sadness for the lives of those cut short. This sadness is mixed with his fear that he's struggling in an impossible war and that the deaths of his comrades will be meaningless. And something deeper than that. I think this is his warmth, his empathy. Guts wears his anger on his sleeve in order to hide his sadness and fear, and his sadness and fear are born from his warmth and empathy. Guts doesn't fully let Puck in though. His harsh exterior is still intact. He belittles Puck, but then sees how much his words hurt the one he had begun to open up to. Puck looks at him with tears in his eyes, then silently flies away. Guts yells out for Puck to come back. He didn't mean to push him away, but he did. He feels how much he hurt Puck, and he feels the loss of a potential comrade. He looks at the keys Puck had brought to rescue him, and then he looks at the wounds on his arm Puck had healed. He hates that he pushed Puck away and that he hurt him, but he can't dwell on it. He has a war to fight. He steels himself through self-harm, an act of guilt and pain, and heads into battle for the lives of his lost comrades. Later, after Guts defeats the Snake Apostle, he revels in taunting and torturing him. This is a side effect of what he does every time he enters battle. He focuses on his rage so that he can forget his sadness and fear, feelings that cause him pain. Anger is easy, it's a release, and it's satisfying, even if that satisfaction is hollow and only lasts for a moment. It's him screaming into the void, mourning the loss of the fire of the hawk. After leaving Coca Castle, Puck and Guts reunite. Puck talks up a storm in the usual Puck fashion, but Guts only asks one thing. "What are you doing here?" Puck dances around the question, and Guts asks if it's elven duty. I think this is what Guts is hoping for, that they can trust each other to watch each other's backs. But Puck says, "I figure if I hang around you, I'd get to see all sorts of neat things." I think Guts takes this as an insult, and that's why he throws Puck into the puddle. Guts wanted a comrade, someone to watch his back. That was the rapport they had begun to build. But Puck, in this moment, placed himself as an observer, separating himself from Guts. To Guts, this was a sort of rejection. Not only was Guts' reaction influenced by this perceived rejection, but also by his habit of keeping people at a distance as to not hurt them. His trust is broken, and his angry Facade emerges. He insults Puck, saying he doesn't like elves and he doesn't like Puck, that weaklings make him want to crush them. This isn't at all how Guts truly feels. He's just lashing out and trying to push Puck away. They part ways again, and it begins to rain. Guts is approached by a priest driving a wagon, who asks if Guts wants a ride. Guts is conflicted. Getting a ride from the priest would make the path to his war easier and provide him with some comfort and rest. But his empathetic need to keep others away for their own safety makes him refuse twice, and then tell the priest he's being followed by angry spirits. He tries his hardest to refuse the priest's offers, but the priest won't say no. Guts sees Puck on the wagon, and then the priest pushes him one last time, saying, "Come on, get on, get on." Guts thinks to himself, well, why not? What do I care if something happens to them? He's lying to himself here. He was already conflicted between his war and his empathy, and the priest pushing him, along with saying Puck, tipped him to the war side. Of course he told himself he didn't care about them. That's what he has to tell himself every time he lets someone in, even a little bit, out of fear for what will happen to them. After Guts gets on the wagon, the priest's daughter gives him homemade wine, saying it'll warm him up. He accepts it and looks at her with a soft expression. She smiles back. He's not used to kindness and warmth in his war, and it warms him to her. Then he and the priest strike up a conversation. The priest talks about his dislike of killing as a profession, and how his nephew died by the sword, how his death was a waste. Guts responds with, "What's wrong with that? He died doing what he wanted no matter what, right? I bet he was happy. Of course, once you die, that's it. Nothing comes after that, nothing at all." Note that Guts doesn't disagree with the priest. In fact, his last words are agreeing with the man. Death is the end. He could have lived a happy life had he not chosen the sword. But he did what made him happy. He lived following his dreams until the very end. Guts shows an understanding and empathy that the priest's beliefs wouldn't allow. Before slipping into a fitful sleep, the priest's daughter covers Guts in a blanket, a simple gesture of kindness. Guts doesn't forget this as he drifts to sleep. After waking, the wagon's met with undead spirits of hatred and malice. The priest's daughter jumps out of the car to try and calm down the terrified horses, but she's immediately killed. Guts looks at her corpse, donning a crazed smile, sweating. As usual, when Guts feels someone else's pain, he relies on his anger to cover it up. His crazed smile and sweat drops convey these conflicting emotions within him: pain, guilt, sadness, rage. After letting his rage run loose, he's met with something even more horrifying. The kind girl who had just died appears, donning a chilling smile and holding the severed head of her father. She approaches Guts, but all he can see is the kind girl that had given him the wine, given him warmth. He can't bring himself to hurt her, until she stabs him and snaps him out of it. He instinctually strikes her down, and as she falls, her blood splatters, a drop landing on his face. He looks at it. Huh? He hadn't processed what he'd done, and in this moment, he realizes he'd killed that kind girl. Children have more potential for dreams than anyone else, and their deaths weigh more heavily on Guts than any other. This pain is too much for his facade to cover, and he vomits, feeling his guilt and pain physically. Then, after snapping himself back, he hides his pain behind anger and battles until dawn. As the sun rises, Guts is lost in thought. He looks at the kind girl's corpse, pained. Puck notices and tells him, "It wasn't your fault." Guts starts to laugh and exclaims with a smile that shows no joy, "Yeah, that's true. You're absolutely right." And then he rattles off his "weaklings deserve to die" facade. Guts had such a strong reaction to Puck's words because Puck was affirming his facade, giving it credence. Guts hadn't heard these words from anyone other than himself, and hearing it was a relief, enough to warrant laughter. Maybe it wasn't his fault. After declaring war on the Count, Puck saves Guts from a group of archers, and right after that, Guts saves Puck from a knight. Watching each other's backs deepens their bond moving forward. After escaping into Vargas' laboratory, Vargas asks Guts if he holds a grudge against the Count, if it's revenge. This provokes Guts to kick the old man's cane out from under him, knocking him down. This definitely isn't an act of empathy, but I think it gives some insight into Guts' anger. When Vargas mentions revenge, I think Guts either assumed Vargas knew about the eclipse, or he just lashed out from being reminded of it. Neither option gives Guts the right to knock down the old man, but if the old man opposed him in his war, he wouldn't hesitate to kill him. After Vargas explains that he opposes the Count, Guts opens up a bit. He tells Vargas that he trusts his story, but when Vargas shows Guts the Behelit, Guts' trust dissipates. He grabs the old man, seeing him as someone who could potentially be an obstacle in his war, one who might become an apostle. Vargas quickly explains that it's not his, and Guts drops his down, still suspicious of the old man. Then, Vargas tells Guts his story, that he, his wife, and his children were captured at the hands of the Count, who ate his family in front of his eyes. The old man cries as he tells his story, exclaiming that he was a prisoner to fear. He managed to escape and has been hiding out ever since, trying to learn the secrets of the Behelit. I think Guts sees himself in the old man, recognizing his fear and pain. The difference is, where Vargas waited for someone else to avenge him, Guts took his destiny into his own hands and forged a path through hell itself. Guts seeing himself in Vargas leads him to trust the old man, and he shares the purpose of the Behelit, signifying his growing trust. Afterwards, Vargas shows Guts a map of the castle, explaining the best route to reach the Count. He asks Guts to avenge him, exclaiming that Guts is his only hope. He touches Guts' shoulder, and Guts' trauma causes him to lash out, kicking the old man and insulting his appearance, his angry facade fully dawned. While it isn't at all justified for Guts to kick the old man, I believe he did it not only because of his past trauma, but because of his perspective on revenge. The pressure Vargas puts on Guts to avenge him reminds me of the dead spirits that try to possess Guts after later accepting the weight of the old man's grudge. They ask him for the same thing Vargas did, revenge. The war Guts is on is already one of revenge. He believes that taking on too much pain and regret of even more people than his old comrades is too much for him to handle, and like he says to the dead spirits, "This is my fight, mine, a person of flesh and blood." Guts doesn't want to hold on to anyone else's revenge. This is his fight for his comrades. If someone else wants to fight for the memory of those they cared about, they should do it with their own hands, not rely on Guts to fight for them. This pressure, along with having his childhood trauma brought back by the old man's touch, and his habit of keeping others at arm's length, leads Guts to lash out. He leans on his angry facade and distances the old man from himself. He has to focus on his war, and he can't be distracted. After Guts and Vargas part ways, Puck berates him for his treatment of the old man, wondering why Guts would act so callously against an ally. Guts falls back on his facade. He says the old man would have just dragged him down, but in fact, he truly feels the opposite, that if Vargas sticks with him, the old man will be dragged down. After saying this, Guts adds, "That goes for you too, bug." I think this is not only Guts relying on his facade, but also testing Puck in a way, to see if he'd leave like the other times he called the Alpha bug, first in the prison cell, and second before meeting the priest. Then, Guts learns about Vargas' execution, and we see how he truly feels about the old man. He's left with an expression of pain and guilt. In the end, the old man's blood is on his hands. He's caused another death. He thinks to the old man in his words, the old man who'd had his eye and legs taken from him. Guts touches the place where his own eye had once been, no doubt being reminded of the eye and arm that had been stolen from him. He sliced them up, chopped them off, and then ate them. Exactly what had happened to Guts during the eclipse. Before my eyes, he took my wife and my sons, just as Guts' comrades and lover had been taken from him. I was nothing but a prisoner of fear. Exactly what Guts is trying not to be. Please, avenge me. Guts feels the pain of the old man, but doesn't know what to do. His turbulent emotions lead him to punch a wall in frustration. As Vargas is about to be executed, Guts comes to watch. He can't interfere as it's an obvious trap that would hinder him in his war, but he comes to watch anyway. He may not be able to save Vargas, but at least he can be there to experience the old man's pain. Puck tries to convince Guts to save Vargas, but Guts doesn't for the reason I stated earlier. He wears his facade and goes on about how the price of a far-fetched ambition is destruction, basically saying Vargas' death is to be expected. Puck feels the emotions behind his facade, self-hating, destructive. Puck spells out Guts' fear to him, a fear that Guts had been trying to bury, that his war was futile. Guts denies it, belittling Puck. Then Puck looks at him with tears filling his eyes. He promptly tells Guts off and flies away. Guts thinks about Puck's tears, realizing that Puck had felt his pain, something that Guts was constantly doing for others. But Puck didn't react like Guts does to this pain. Instead of masking it in aloofness and anger, he looked at Guts and expressed that pain. He showed his empathy. This is a realization for Guts, not as something new, but as something he'd tried to forget. Buried underneath his anger, grief, and fear, his empathy, his compassion. He says to himself, Should I feel compassion? You gotta be kidding me! His whole life, every time he'd opened himself to compassion, it ended in pain. Gambino, Martino, Griffith, the Hawk, Casca, the priest's daughter, Vargas. The thought of actively opening up is just too overwhelming to Guts. He can't handle the collective pain. Then, Vargas is beheaded. Guts looks on in shock, and then walks away with a face full of pain and guilt. He finds Vargas's decapitated head, killing the man who was going to toss it aside. He tells the severed head, "The look in your eyes, filled with vengeance. I won't fail like you." In this moment, he shoulders the old man's burden and carries it with him. Then, as if sensing his openness to avenging the wishes of the dead, spirits try and overtake Guts, wishing to take revenge with him. He snaps himself out of it, exclaiming, "Never! You and I got nothing in common. You're dead, all of you. You're nothing but worthless scum. Get away from me, carcasses. This is my fight. Mine, a person of flesh and blood." This is him donning his facade and heading back to war. He pushes away the dead, including Vargas, and gets back into war mode, fighting with his own flesh and blood for the memory of his lost comrades. When he and the Count begin to fight, Guts holds his own, but he can't hurt the Count. Eventually, after trying to set up a trap for the Count, Guts is caught by 2 heavy blows. He's left unable to stand, and the Count spells out his fears, that his journey is impossible, that his war is futile, and that his fate was sealed the moment he was branded. The Count tells Guts something that, interestingly enough, becomes the answer later on, albeit in a very different context. That Guts should give up on his war, that it's not worth the pain it brings. Guts looks at the Count with a face of defeat, and the Count bashes him into the ground and through 2 pillars. Guts is left slumped over, barely conscious. He doesn't make a move until the Count's daughter enters the fray. He sees an opportunity in her entrance to use her as a hostage. This obviously isn't very empathetic of him, but he's in war mode. He can't die. He has to use whatever means necessary to continue his war. He uses her as a hostage and finishes off the Count. Well, mostly finishes him off. Being dragged into hell technically finishes the job. Then, Theresa faces the aftermath of the battle. She'd seen her father's true form, witnessed the horrible truth of his mother's death, and seen the horror of Guts' world. She cries out, "I want to go back to my room. I don't want to be here. Get me out of here. If I have to stay here, in this place, I'd rather be dead." Guts looks at her and says, "Then go ahead. Kill yourself." I want to bring up Guts' last scene with Jill at the end of the Lost Children's arc here. She doesn't want to face her reality and asks to escape, to run away with Guts. Guts tells her that there is no paradise to escape to fight on her own battlefield. She does. She decides to struggle and survive, no matter what. Guts knows full well how painful it is to face reality-shattering events. Telling Theresa to kill herself isn't to antagonize her, he just knows that there's no room to go back to. If she isn't willing to struggle and survive, then in his mind, she's better off killing herself. She's on the verge of ending it all. Puck is trying to stop her, but the look in her eyes makes her intent clear. Before she can finish the job, the floor crumbles from beneath her and she begins to fall. Guts looks at her, accepting the girl's death as what she wanted. But as he watches her, he sees something in her expression. Her face isn't one of acceptance, she's crying out. He instinctively reaches out his sword to save her, and she grabs on, her hands being torn to shreds. As she screams in agony, Guts swings his sword, throwing her onto the ground. He looks at her, shaking. He looks at his hand, and then closes it into a fist, eyes full of pain and guilt. Theresa tells Guts that it's all his fault, the opposite of what Puck had once said about the collateral of his war. His facade quickly takes over, and his face hardens, not showing any of his pain. As he leaves, she yells after him, "I'll kill you! Someday, I swear, I'll kill you!" He looks back, smiling. "I'm ready when you are." And as he walks away, his face is overflowing with sadness, regret, and pain. He then regains his composure, dons his facade, and moves on. When Theresa had decided to kill herself, and as she had begun to fall, Guts truly felt that letting her die was right, that it was a kindness. But after seeing her willingness to go through so much pain to survive, he learned that she truly could struggle and survive, that she didn't really want death. He doubted her will to live, and because of his doubt, her hands were slashed. After saving her, his shaking shows how troubled he is, realizing he'd been wrong about telling her to kill herself, and almost letting her die. He looks at his hands and feels the pain he'd caused her. When she blames him, he believes her. He accepts it in resignation, not wanting to burden her with his emotions. That's why he dons his facade. And then, when she tells him she'll kill him, I think his smile is genuine. This statement means so many things to him. It proves that she plans to live, and with that, he's met with relief. I think he also sees himself in her, with him, horrifyingly enough, being Griffith. Her hatred of him pushing her to keep living. With that, he's met with pain. Her words don't allow his facade to hide the pain he'd caused her. Just as Puck saying it wasn't his fault had lifted his guilt, Theresa's blame weighs on him more than he'd experienced yet this arc. He walks away with his facade torn apart, unable to contain the pain and guilt he feels. But then again, he's got a war to fight. He's got comrades' memories to keep alive. He steels himself and moves on, ending the Black Swordsman arc. I hope you enjoyed the video. I didn't originally intend for it to be an almost scene-by-scene analysis of the whole arc, but given the nature of my interpretation, it naturally became what it is. If you liked the video, I'd be honored if you'd leave a like or even subscribe. If you don't, I'd love to hear about your different interpretations about the arc in the comment section below. I hope you all have a wonderful day. This has been Evan. Thank you for watching.